Bien, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Merci beaucoup d'être là pendant une période qui aurait pu être utilisée pour...
So this is a slot we should have used for a lunch break. My name is Bernard Wargagnan. We'd like to welcome you to a bit provoking title, A World Without Active Directory. Is it possible? I will have Bastien with me to make my presentation. With no further ado, can we maybe start the presentation? So why do we ask the question? Well, of course, we intend to be a bit provocative. Well, if you look at the development of the information systems since the appearance of the cloud with different levels of adoption and information system, which is becoming more and more open globally because the information system must provide services, be connected with customers, partners. So the information system, with its components and with mobile environment, which are more and more predominant. Well, the information system, where the scope, the traditional approach to security scope is disappearing. So if we want to illustrate the last frontier of the information system security, well, we would then say the identity, because it's through the identity that we can access all the components of the information system, be it on the cloud, at a terminal, or elsewhere. So the identity is playing a increasingly more central role. So this is why, unfortunately, the identity has become the target of 95, maybe even 100% of the attacks. It's through access to identity that it's possible to access to the rest of the information system. So if we go back to the last decade, and we have had to manage a security crisis with our customers around the security and the issue of Active Directory. If we were to sum up, why is this an attractive target? If you look at the behavior of the attackers, what are they looking for? Generally speaking, they try to have 2 points of access. First of all, privileged domain accounts. So if you have access to accounts which are really broad, like administration accounts, so if we have access to this type of data mining, then we have. So this is why we have to really secure the authentication systems. And then there is another access, the VIP, the very important persons. So leaders who have access to sensitive information, corporate information, this you can cash in on this information, or like accounts of people who are providing an assistance to the previous target group, the VIPs, and for maintenance purpose, to go in situ to connect to the machine, the hardware, which seems to be really being attacked, or accounts of the legal department, which very often does hold very interesting information, call for tenders, mergers, acquisitions, and other sensitive information. All the project managers' accounts. So having access to the specifications of the future products, researchers, of course, who are developing the digital industrial future assets, innovation, and so on. And generally speaking, any Active Directory account which is associated with some privileges. So the Active Directory is an attractive target due to its very nature. So why is it unfortunately really controlled or accessed? Because some activities are increasing, unfortunately, the probability of compromised data. For example, you connect yourself to the machine or the hardware of in order to solve the problem using the account, and so you are opening the door to the attacker to steal some information. If this information is not, this data is not well protected, generally speaking, the accounts which are corporate accounts which have been compromised with a privileged account, well, very often are the case of administrative staff which do not secure their account, you know. So some using freely surf the internet freely to perform some tasks. This is just a crazy behavior. This is the really frequent occurrence and accounts which have been replicated on different machines. But if you have hacked one local mining account, then you have done all of them, because they're all similar. Also, the fact that there is a massive use of privileged accounts. We can see some companies which have 200, 500,000 privileged accounts. So every time they add additional targets and increase the number of access to privileged information. And very often the domain accounts are not secured. So there is a whole set of reason explaining this probability. But Active Directory, due to its technical nature, is highly complex. And very often it's difficult to administer it on a daily basis. Well, Active Directory is not just simply a directory. No. Well, you will find some capacity to authentication, administration, authorization, governance, managing identities and access, give access to applications, and reporting, and reporting on daily access. So you have global access to the Active Directory, which is like a Swiss knife, multi-functions, which are used in a Active Directory environment using Windows or not. So Active Directory, due to this a very versatile activity and a design, which I would like to remind you dates back to the end of the 90s, so the previous century, because Active Directory has appeared, if I'm not mistaken, in 1999 with Windows 2000. So the design of this directory has aged, and so one should wonder now if it's still possible to use this AD on a daily basis. This brings me to the next question, which was a bit provocative in my introduction. Do we still need Active Directory? When I can say for sure that the way Active Directory was designed is not a good solution to manage modern applications using mechanisms which have changed, with some protocols which today are, are not up to date, which could depend from OpenID Connect, for example. In such an environment, we see that Active Directory did not evolve the way it should have in order to meet these modern needs. So I cannot imagine also an environment where we'll not continue to use Active Directory. We have to be realistic. Some companies have invested a huge amount of money. For example, the automotive industry production line will use Active Directory to perform different automation tasks in the factory. A factory costs a lot of money, so we cannot imagine suddenly, because a technology is really not up to date, that we should change it overnight. So I think we should, progressively try to really see how we could reduce the impact of Active Directory, try to really review its system Azure Active Directory. And so when you are in charge of the security system of your company, well, you have to make a choice. Sometimes choices are difficult. You can spend a fortune in securing the system, and this is an ongoing exercise, because the experience shows that what you have done has to be then redone a few months later. So in this particular area, it means that this is an ongoing process, and I think this should stay one of the top priorities of the managers of the security system of the information. However, I think we should already start reflecting about the future and try to anticipate the possibility of reducing the digital print of Azure Active Directory. So if you look at the different challenges which have to be met with AD, the top one is the weight of the past and the technical debt. If you look the operational aspect of the AD, very often you see that it's, from archaeological point of view, the result of the archiving system culture of a client. So centralized to decentralized management, so regionalized territorial management, or using a system, for example, through mergers, acquisitions, or the central management said, I would like to add my new acquisition, the new company. So what you do, well, you then through the Active Directory, you approve the link with the acquired company. So, and then you can integrate the users and also give them all the SSO and so on. The problem, and I've seen, to be honest, many crises in this particular field, because the security system of the small company, which was purchased by the big one, is not up to par. So, very often the hackers will use the small company to access the big one, and will have access to all the privileges. So the technical debt is really accumulated year after year. So information in a directory are still there, but because you forgot to delete them. Some collaborators have left and you forgot to delete their information, or some accounts which are used for some operation tasks which are not used anymore, but they have privileged access still. So also the feeling that it's, you can just update to the last Windows version to solve all the security problem. No, not at all. Because, well, maybe some part of your system will be updated, but all the mess in the AD will still be the same mess with the new Windows version. This is not going to change the problem. So the AD is a easy target to attack. New functionalities, silos of authentication, protected groups, which are functionalities most of the people ignore, because this is, really in a whole set of information which people have not really triggered. And generally speaking, the Active Directory and the whole history, of the Active Directory is something you drag along with you and you keep it alive. So the original design of Active Directory, so replication, managing domain accounts, and so on, back then, it was a very sophisticated system. At the very beginning, there was problems actually to launch it. Today, it's really performing very well. However, it's very complex system, not very flexible, as I said with the example of the acquisition. And if you do not do all the work when you acquire a new company to make sure that the new company will join the largest one, does have the same level of security, otherwise you are going head first into a complete disaster. And I've seen so many companies, this due diligence processes, like looking at the balance sheet. Well, I think the diligence on the security should also be conducted. And then there is another problem. Quite simply, a problem we experience on a daily basis is lack of resources. Today, we don't have the available resources on the labor market. So Microsoft, of course, we have partnership with a different school of engineering. We created a master in defensive cybersecurity. School 2000, Epitech, and so on. So we hope this year, that by the end of this year, we will have educated 2,000 masters in technology and security. But for the last 15 years, there has been a shortage of technical expertise on the French market. And despite the efforts, we can see that, the shortage is still there, because we can see that the level of shortage is still the same. So there is a problem of human resources, but the tools also are lacking around Active Directory. Well, I think, we can also share that responsibility. But the tools are very complex. You need a know-how in order to be capable of using these tools. So there is a major problem in this particular field. The fact that we use Active Directory Azure does provide us with some more security. So conditioned access. So I think this is one of the most interesting functions of Azure Active Directory. There will be a native capacity of data protection, also the capacity to properly, adequately manage the privilege identity through native Azure AD, also the authentication system with no password, which are user-friendly, with the support of Azure AD, with a protocol FIDO2, so that we use a web approach, passwordless, we will also have new possibilities to collaborate internally, externally, B2B, B2C, to create a relationship, but nothing to do with the authorization procedures I mentioned earlier on. But this is going to create an environment where you will cooperate with the different users, full transparency, but also under a complete supervision of complying with rules and access to information for the partners and so on. Also a capacity to manage the different tasks, the different jobs in a more modern way. Active Directory, it means group policy object, actually. You must have heard about this. And if I ask a question, how many are available? Well, I'm sure that not many of you will be capable of saying how many there are, because from a human point of view, it's impossible to know how many GPOs are available in Windows environment, more than 2,000. I stopped counting a long time ago, but it's well beyond the capacity human beings have of understanding of what not to do. So the granularity of the system is way too big, and without knowing it, we do sometimes really stupid things. So it's a modern management of the jobs, integrating new jobs so that we can benefit from functionality like autopilot, so you can use images, trusted images on Windows without creating a master. So you completely delete the master function from an organizational and technical point of view. This is big headway. Also, there is a possibility to use endpoint management to manage all your different jobs, and also you have native support microservices in the cloud. It's quite an interesting service, allowing you to perform some tasks in a self-configurated system, so you don't have to create virtual chains and delete them. No, you create them and you destroy them upon command without questioning this. So it means that for some tasks, you have a capacity to manage the identity, and also you can benefit from more flexibility. The system is much more agile because in the cloud you manage the identity, with billions of logon capacity per day. So just to give you an idea of what we generate in the cloud. So on a daily basis, we collect 24,000 billion security events on a daily basis. So this is to give you a idea of the volume Azure AD will have to manage. So if you want to use Active Directory for millions, just millions of subscribers, you would have a incredible work to do, and actually it's unmanageable. So I just insisted on something you have to keep in mind, despite the name. The name is a marketing decision, so I'm not going to question it. So Azure AD and Active Directory, so AD stays the same, but Azure AD is operating completely different way. So don't think that Azure AD, despite its name, it's Active Directory in Azure. Not at all. It is not a solution to manage identities for Microsoft. No, this is going to provide identities for users, subscribers, and for the workstations, and also for modern also usage which were not supported by Active Directory. So you have a native Active Directory, and with Azure AD, you are in an environment where you will use Scheme, SAML, and OIDC, OAuth2. So the protocol environment is completely different, allowing you to absorb then applications from very diverse backgrounds. So this presents advantages. However, it does not really operate in the same way. If you try and look at, so this is transition to the cloud. Okay, let's imagine 5 steps, and Bastien will illustrate them. So first of all, you connect yourself to the cloud. Many of our clients are doing, but some are still using Active Directory in parallel. They will synchronize their passwords through DH synchronization of the passwords. So they will, and little by little, they will switch to a hybrid environment. So will dissociate themselves from a local environment, dissociate from the AD, and maybe one day we will reach 100% cloud. And now I give the floor to Bastien, who will continue the presentation.
Thank you, Bernard. So the idea is to bring you to this journey. It takes a bit of time. If we had more time, it would be better, but let's see what we can do and what is waiting for us in 2 or 3 years. And so I'm pretty sure that you are aware of the fact that the journey in the cloud is beginning with Azure AD. So Office 365 services will very soon offer this possibility. And so we will pass from the SSO to something which is completely transparent. Obviously, we are not willing that again all the users should log on each time. And we don't want that they have to use a lot of applications, but they can they can use a lot of cloud services. And so we will synchronize these user identities in the cloud. The second step is to become hybrid, because in the AD version Azure, we can find the endpoints becoming hybrid and are joined to Azure AD. And so we can also typically begin by managing my device's identities, and behind of it there is a mechanism like Azure AD, and I can also check the conformity of a series of things. And we will also begin to migrate in Azure AD a lot of files and data. At this point, we will transpose the past AD and the principle of identification to something which is more oriented to the external cloud. And we have various ways to do it. First of all, Azure AD services and proxified Azure AD services. So my application can go to Azure ID via authentication. And so under authentication, it's a protocol that we understand. And so I also need a good level of guarantee of the authentication. So it has to be verified and also an old legacy that has to pass to Azure AD for the users. And so at this stage, how my users will experiment their digital identity. So for that, I have to make them autonomous, much more autonomous on the public services. And so, for example, managing different groups, managing the password changes without needing someone else. And so, what is really interesting at that stage is all the economy cost stops that we can do with this new software. And on top of that, the users are rewarded by the personal experience to be able to manage it themselves. The third step is the transition from the on-site state toward Azure AD. So I will guarantee my independence at that stage because the old legacy was a huge dependence from a centralized software system. In that case, in the new case, we will dissociate ourselves from this dependency and become autonomous without breaking down the traditional management. And so, from this moment, the identity of my devices will be integrally in the new cloud system. So, for that, I need a new and very strong level of identification, authentication, and security. The concept is also to go forward with these services and offer more and more independent services to our users without needing the VPN software. And there are few services that won't migrate to the new Azure AD system. And this fact will give us a list, a series of references, which will become a network, a very opened, fully opened networking in the internet with services of identification, etc. We have also the possibility to collaborate within Azure AD. We have already talked about B2B, B2C collaborations, partnerships in the case of mergers, in the frame of acquisitions. So it's something that is much more reactive and can permit to achieve a lot of projects. Next step would be to migrate a maximum of things, files, informations, and data. So we saw that in the past everything was centralized in the Active Directory. From this moment, everything will be centralized in the cloud. So the AD will be minimized. So we will migrate HR system to SaaS And this step is really key because we already see that few customers are started to using this system, and the rule will be that my applications, my devices will be hosted entirely in the cloud. Traditionally it was not like that, but what was in the previous AD will be used as a tool of prolification of the toolkit, etc., to offer an identification service, but from this moment in the Azure AD. So we will manage users forced on the cloud and rewrite only if it's necessary. It will be also a modernized application system. So how can I, for example, get to my files in the new system? So there is a need for this part, and that's why this is a very complex system, and we have to work on these identities, and every applications having a dependency which were dependent on the past system will be erased. And but in the case of very important files that we need, we can migrate them to the cloud, to Azure AD. And after that, later on, eventually, we can also erase them. And they are also a very visionary part of Azure AD, because in a few years we will find the perfect solution. So the concept is to give a journey, to give a plan, how to get there, how to reach this objective, and how to get the direct benefits from that. So today we can stop to make maintenance on the traditional AD. The new journey is starting, and so we invest more in the securization of the new ID, migrating all the files, all the infos, and data. It will take some time for everybody, for us too, because we already mentioned that the software is sometimes already available, but most of the time is a project. And so we will also go step by step. So what kind of benefits we can get from this journey? So maybe I would need a support team, a background team, because we have to filter and supervise the old AD and all the files, or maybe I'm needy of some reactivity. So we will proceed by targets. And so how to wrap up these 5 steps? The idea is to orientate ourselves on the results and migrate everything that we need furthermore. So my colleague already mentioned that in the old AD there are good, bad informations, all type of files, useless files, thousands of useless files. So the moment came when we can select what we would need further more in the future. And also the SaaS services, which are very important and will be very important in the new Azure AD. So how to get there? I don't want to go deep in the details, but there are a few projects that will lead us to concrete results. So migrate data for the users, for the devices, modernize the job posts, so modern management of job posts. So that will permit in a first period to gain time, and secondly, it will simplify the processes and also make gaining some costs. For example, zero master and evolution of how to manage my computer and my devices. Secondly, how I will migrate my application, my apps. Um, so here, this is the architecture of the system, which will be very helpful. So how to do all that, how to migrate all this data. The first step is to tell ourselves that we won't base ourselves on the old system, but telling to us that each new step, each new project will need a new identity management. And It means that firstly, we will focalize in the native applications in the ID. It's not all the time needed to recode the application. Sometimes it can migrate like that to Azure. And in other cases, it would need a new identification to make compatible with the new Azure AD. After that, conditioned access, that's the second step. And so we can, by this way, recuperate most of the application, but in the same time, avoid risks. And for the existing applications, it will take more work and more efforts, because why are my existing applications sometimes in a CMBD it's very well informed, so it's obvious which kind of effort would I need to migrate them and into the new Azure AD. Okay, yes, we can tell that. The second way to do it is telling that okay, maybe IA and other tools will know what to do, and thanks to that, I will also know what's going on, what's happening, the shadow key, for example, and so maybe it will ease the effort of making migrate my datas, and so the end users will also be very happy with all that, because it will ask less effort. And what to do with the other users in AFDS. In this case, we have to think what is possible to do with the existing applications. If it's typical or atypical, and then we can, after that, start the transition partially or entirely. So after the migration made, everything can be stored in Azure AD. And in this presentation, you will find everything which was said. And so, I'm a bit too fast. And after that, last steps. So all applications that are not able to take the new identification, so what will I do with them? Replace them, erase them. I leave them like that. So that's a risk evaluation that has to be made. And the last part of our presentation is this one. What can be used as accelerator for a better and faster migration? So we can create native users, new users, new business units in already existing projects, in the AD modernization projects, like last generation, new generations project, the cloud mergers, and eventually also all persons who are in the physical field and who are in the infrastructures where they might be needing these services. And other scripts, very briefly, on the user profiles. So these users who are natively in the cloud and who are dependent of these tools and the software. So hybrid identity machines and persons, or 100 persons native users. You can see few examples of these users on the screen. 2-3 things that we can propose you, because we are not the only one who are working on these trainings on how to get and migrate to Azure AD. So we have a webinar that can help you out on this journey, on the transition onto Azure AD. Okay, do you want me to give you back the micro? So we are here, and for 2 or 3 days we are talking on this subject globally, more on details. So thank you very much for your attention.